My brother's truck was already in the driveway when I turned onto the gravel road. I remember sitting there with the engine running, just staring at it. He wasn't supposed to be here. Nobody was supposed to be here. I had planned this moment for 14 months, and somehow, in the span of one afternoon, everything had already gone sideways before I even stepped out of the car. Let me back up. My parents came to Canada from the Philippines in 1989. My father worked in a meat processing plant in Winnipeg for 11 years before his back gave out. My mother cleaned hotel rooms until her knees made it impossible to keep going. They never complained. Not once. They raised 3 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment in the North End, made sure we had winter coats every year, drove us to every school event in a car that had no business being on the road in a Manitoba winter. They did everything right by us. Every single thing. My older brother moved to Calgary for work about 8 years ago. My younger sister is in nursing school in Toronto. I stayed in Winnipeg. I work in logistics management, have for about 6 years now. I'm not wealthy by any stretch, but I've been careful with money since I was a teenager. I have a small investment portfolio, no debt except a manageable mortgage on my condo, and I've been putting a portion of every paycheck away since I was 22. My parents don't know the details of my finances. I never saw a reason to talk about it. About 2 years ago, I started noticing things. My father's hands shaking a little when he poured his coffee. My mother getting tired more easily than she used to. They were both in their mid-60s, which isn't old, but the decades of physical work had added up. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator. The heating was inconsistent. The neighborhood had changed over the years. I started thinking about what I wanted their next chapter to look like, and I realized I had the means to actually do something about it. I spent 4 months looking at properties. I wasn't looking for something flashy. I was looking for something safe, quiet, manageable, somewhere they could actually exhale. I found a property near Birds Hill Park, about 20 minutes northeast of the city. A bungalow, 3 bedrooms, 1 level, no stairs, a covered porch, a yard that wasn't too large to maintain, and a small pond visible from the kitchen window. The previous owners had updated the mechanicals recently. The roof was 2 years old. It was solid. It was calm. It was exactly right. The purchase price was $260,000. I put $60,000 down and took a mortgage on the remainder in my name. I paid for the renovations out of my savings, new flooring throughout, an accessibility-friendly bathroom, a proper ramp to the back door, and a proper heating system with a backup. By the time I was finished, I had put in just over $300,000 between the purchase, the down payment structure, and every upgrade. I don't say that number to be impressive. I say it because it becomes important later. I had a lawyer here in Winnipeg, someone I trusted, help me set up a life estate arrangement. The property was transferred into my parents' names with a life estate clause. That means they have the full legal right to live in that home for the rest of their lives. Nobody can remove them, rent it out, sell it, or interfere with it in any way as long as they are alive. After they pass, the property reverts to me as the remainderman. I also prepaid the property taxes for 10 years through the City of Winnipeg's prepayment program, and I set up a separate account to cover utilities and maintenance with automatic transfers. My lawyer explained everything to them in Tagalog with help from a community interpreter, so there was no confusion. They understood exactly what they had. I wanted them to feel secure, not just comfortable. I told them I was taking them for a long drive to look at something. My mother kept asking where we were going. I told her I had a surprise. My father, who is not a man of many words, sat in the passenger seat and watched the highway the whole way there without asking a single question. When we pulled up and I handed my mother the keys, she stood on the porch for a long time without moving. My father walked the perimeter of the yard slowly, stopped at the fence near the pond, and then came back and put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That was 14 months ago. My brother called me 3 times over the next few weeks. The calls felt different than usual. He was asking very specific questions: how the title was structured, whether their names were on the deed, what would happen to the property eventually. I told him the basics: life estate, their names, my name as remainderman, everything handled by a lawyer. He said he was just curious. He said it was good that I looked after the family. He said, "You've always been like that." I noticed something in his voice that I didn't like but couldn't quite name at the time. I should tell you about my brother. He is not a bad person in the way that shows up in news stories. He is the kind of person who always has a reason why things should go a certain way, why he deserves a little more consideration, why the rules apply differently in his particular situation. He married a woman who is exactly the same. Together, They have built an entire life around the logic that whatever comes their way is simply what they're owed. His business in Calgary had some difficulties last year. I knew about that. What I didn't know was how far those difficulties had gone. I found out later, much later, that my brother had, over the course of about 2 months, been having private conversations with my parents about the house. He had been telling them that the life estate arrangement was complicated, that it created problems, that it would be better, easier, simpler, more fair if the title was restructured so that both he and I were included as equal parties. He framed it as wanting to contribute. He told my father that, as the eldest son, it felt wrong that he wasn't part of the home. He told my mother he wanted to help with the costs. He presented himself as someone trying to do the right thing. My parents, who came from a culture that deeply respects the eldest child and deeply avoids conflict, started to feel the pressure of that. They didn't tell me because they didn't want to upset me. They didn't tell me because my brother had specifically asked them not to, framing it as something he and I should work out between ourselves as a family. He was counting on them staying quiet. He was counting on their deference. What he didn't count on was my mother calling me on a Tuesday night in tears because she was afraid of what was happening and couldn't hold it in anymore. She told me everything. The conversations, the documents her brother-in-law had apparently printed off from somewhere and brought over. The way my brother had started referring to the house as the family property in conversations with relatives back home. The fact that my brother and his wife were planning to drive out the following Saturday, this coming Saturday, to discuss the future of the property with my parents, and that they had apparently also reached out to a real estate agent in the area to get a rental valuation done. A rental valuation. On the house I bought for my parents to live in, I told my mother to say nothing to my brother. I told her I was coming. I did not sleep that night. I called my lawyer the next morning. She walked me through everything clearly and calmly. The life estate was clean. It was registered on title at the Winnipeg Land Titles Office. My brother had no legal standing whatsoever. Whatever documents he had printed off and brought to my parents meant nothing. There was nothing he could do from a legal perspective. But she also told me something important. She said that if my parents, under pressure, ever willingly signed anything or agreed to any modification, that could potentially create complications. She said the best thing I could do was be present and make sure they understood their rights before any conversation happened. I drove out Saturday morning. I brought my folder. My brother's truck was in the driveway. He had arrived early. I sat in the car for a moment and let the feeling move through me. Not anger exactly, more like a very quiet clarity. Then I got out. My mother opened the door before I reached the porch. She hugged me and held on longer than usual. Over her shoulder, I could see my brother and his wife sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of them, and my father standing near the window with his arms crossed, looking out toward the pond. My brother looked up when I walked in. Something moved across his face, surprise, recalibration, the quick mental adjustment of someone who had not expected this particular variable. He smiled. "Hey," he said. "Didn't know you were coming out today." "I know," I said. I said hello to his wife. I set my folder on the counter. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the counter for a moment before I said anything else. My father had turned from the window. My mother was standing near the hallway. Nobody was speaking. My brother gestured at the papers on the table. We were just going over some things, trying to figure out how to make this whole setup more fair for everyone. "What's not fair about it?" I asked. "Well," he said, and leaned back a little. "I'm family too. I should have some stake in this property. It's a family asset. That's how these things should work." I looked at my father. My father was looking at the table. I put my water glass down and opened my folder. The first document was the certificate of title from the Winnipeg Land Titles Office, showing the life estate in my parents' names and the remainder interest in mine. I placed it on the table. The second document was a letter from my lawyer, dated that week, summarizing the legal structure of the arrangement, confirming that no modification could be made to the title without the consent of the remainder man, which is me, and explicitly noting that any attempt to pressure the life estate holders into signing documents affecting property could constitute undue influence under Manitoba law. The third document was a printout of the relevant sections of the Real Property Act of Manitoba, with the applicable passages highlighted. I placed them in front of him one at a time. His wife picked up the first document. She looked at it for a moment and set it down. She looked at my brother. My brother was reading the lawyer's letter. The expression on his face was doing something I had never seen it do before. It was cycling through several versions of itself and finding that none of them were going to work. "This is just paperwork," he said finally. "Yes," I said. "It is." That doesn't mean we can't sit down as a family and come to a different agreement. You're welcome to sit down as a family, I said. But there's no agreement to reach. The title is registered. It is what it is. You're being selfish, his wife said. This is their home. Their family should have access. I turned to her. They have full access. They live here. That's the entire point. You know what she means, my brother said. I think I do, I said. And the answer is no. My father spoke then. He hadn't said anything since I walked in, and when he spoke, it was quietly, in a tone I recognized from childhood, the tone that meant the conversation was over. He said, "This is the house your sister built for us. She gave us this. You were not part of that." He said it without anger. He just said it as a fact. My brother sat very still. I collected the documents from the table and returned them to my folder. I looked at the rental valuation printout that was among the papers my brother had brought. It was from a property management company out of Selkirk. I picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and set it back down. I'd also like to mention, I said, that I have the contact information for the property management company listed on this. I'm going to give them a courtesy call on Monday to let them know the property is not available and to ask that they remove any listing they may have started. If a listing goes live without my consent as remainderman, that's something my lawyer will need to get involved in. My brother stood up. You're making this into a bigger thing than it needs to be. No, I said. I'm making it exactly the size it is. He and his wife left about 20 minutes later. There wasn't much more to say, and everyone in the room understood that. My mother walked them to the door and came back and stood in the kitchen and looked at the table where the papers had been. Then she started making tea. My father went out to the porch. I followed him after a few minutes and stood beside him. It was early November, clear and cold, the kind of Manitoba morning that is brutal and beautiful at the same time. The pond had a thin skim of ice at the edges. There were birds moving in the cattails along the bank. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "You know what I think about sometimes? I think about when you were small and you used to wait by the window for my truck to come down the street. You would stand there and watch until you saw the headlights." He paused. "I think about that." I didn't say anything. "You have always been watching out," he said. I called my lawyer on Monday as promised. The property management company confirmed there had been an inquiry, but no listing had been created. They removed the file, and that was the end of it. I had a longer conversation with my brother about 2 weeks later, on the phone. It wasn't easy and it wasn't warm, but it was honest. I told him that what he had done was not just legally wrong, but genuinely hurtful not to me, but to our parents, who had spent days anxious and caught in the middle of something that never should have involved them. He didn't apologize, not really, but he also didn't push back. There was a long silence at one point, and I think somewhere in that silence there was something like recognition. I don't know what our relationship looks like going forward. I'm not ready to answer that yet. What I know is that my parents are in their home. My mother grows tomatoes on the south side of the yard in summer. My father has a chair on the porch where he sits in the evening and watches the light come off the pond. They have security, not just the kind you can feel, but the kind that is written down, registered, and protected. Nobody can take that from them. The last time I was out there, I sat at the kitchen table and had coffee while my mother made arroz caldo and my father came in from outside with mud on his boots, and my mother pretended to be annoyed about it, and neither of them were young anymore, but they were. Completely, entirely at ease. There was no tension in the air. There was nothing to worry about. There was just the smell of ginger and the sound of a spoon against a pot, and my father's voice telling a story I had heard a dozen times before. I think sometimes about the word security. What it actually means for people who spent decades without it. It's not an alarm system or a bank balance. It's the feeling of knowing that the place you are in is yours, that nobody is coming to change that you can close your eyes and still be there when you open them. I built my parents that, and I will spend whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, to make sure they keep it. That's all I wanted to say.